Good evening. It's Monday, June 2nd. It's 6:31. We're in the City Council chambers. This is the Safety and Public Works Committee. And we have 3 items that were on the agenda. We've added 2 more. And we'll start out with item number 1, which is Charter Communication Franchise Agreement in the interpretation. I'll jump in real quick. And the reason I asked this to be put on was there was a couple of complaints of poles not being removed by Charter Communication after Brainerd Public Utilities took their stuff off the poles. And one of the complaints is in the alley from Lowell going north to Wausau. And basically I went to Brainerd Public Utilities, addressed it there. What they do is after 30 days, if Charter doesn't take the stuff off the poles, when they do, Charter ends up with the poles. So then it's their responsibility. Well, the hiccup you have is you got 2 sets of poles going down the alley because Brainerd Public Utilities puts a new run in and hangs their stuff on the new poles, and then the old poles are still hanging there with Charter stuff on the old stuff. So when I brought it to Brainerd Public Utilities' attention, they said, well, it's in your franchise agreement, but, basically, that's something you're gonna have to visit. So I did read the franchise agreement. There is some language in regards to what time frame they have from the time we go underground, or we change a different area. What time frame would Charter have to take the stuff off of the old poles, put them on the new, or go underground? Brainerd Public Utilities said it's based on how much money they have. I won't buy that.
Well, who has?
Charter. They said, well, this year they have a little bit more money and maybe they can do it this year, but the last couple of years they didn't have no money, so they didn't do it. Yeah, and we're sitting up here and what they are doing is leeching off of Brainerd Public Utilities. They don't put nothing in, they use their poles and, in this franchise agreement. So I would like it revisit, and then also who do you complain to? So when I called Brainerd Public Utilities and Jeff, it was really tough to find somebody in town, a contact person.
I know.
And say, okay, I've got a complaint here with these alleys, and an answer. There was nothing there. So I finally got a hold of a Robert, was his name Robert Budd or?
Bud Roberts.
Bud Roberts, there you go. And he said he would contact me back after I talked to him, and he never called back. He was heading to the cities, and he said he'd call me back and let me know what the situation is. The next time I call, I got voicemail, and I have not heard anything back from him. So I did mention at the last Brainerd Public Utilities meeting. They said, it's something that the city should deal with and then look at our franchise agreement. But there's a couple of things that should be addressed in this franchise agreement when I looked at it. And I wrote a couple of them down. One is, first of all, it's 10 years old. It should be revisited. I see Kelly Bevins and the mayor signed it back in 2005. The committee, there's supposed to be a committee, and I don't know who the committee is.
It's our cable committee.
Yeah, and who was on it? And
Well, they haven't met for a while. When I was chair, do you remember, I really rejuvenated them, and we were meeting every other
Okay.
month. And then it died again. But we do have a committee, and the last person who was the chairman
It says,
was, I know his name, but you should have a list of it
it says a
somewhere.
permanent committee known as the Cable TV shall
Yeah,
continue
okay.
as this. The committee shall consist of 5 members. I don't know who they are. Each member should be appointed for a term of 3 years, but,
Yeah, we got it.
and I would like to refer this to that committee to visit it, but I don't know who the committee is or when they meet or when they've last
Well,
met.
I'm their liaison. They haven't met since I was chairman.
So you want to initiate?
Yeah, I will if you ask me to. You have to ask me.
I'll ask nicely. Well,
I-
on that committee, there'll be
I'll
2
be glad
things.
to do it.
The other thing is the current fees, and the fees were set at 3% of the thing, and it says you can go up to 5%. Has anybody looked at increasing those fees from 3 to 5, or
I know that the committee talked about that when they had a committee, but we would meet with the people who were from the companies as well.
okay?
And of course, all they'll do is pass it. And the public feels that those costs are already astronomical, cable costs. And so they make it very clear, and of course they can by law. They'll just simply pass it on to their subscribers. So we frankly did not want to do that. We can certainly raise the issue But I'm sure the answer will be the same.
Unless you have different committee members.
Okay.
Would they necessarily pass it on locally, or, you know, that's a
Nationwide.
huge
There you go.
international corporation,
They'll
Nationwide.
pass it on.
No,
but they
nationwide.
have their package deals for,
Yeah.
you know, $35.95 a month, you get this, that.
But I
And
think,
that's the same all over.
you may be right on that,
You know, it's only
but it's
chartered
something that we,
towns.
because we've had lengthy discussions.
Okay. From what I gather, it's only charter that's holding up the
No,
polls.
well, it's only charter, but one thing to keep in mind, this particular franchise agreement is identical to the one that we have with CTC. CTC renewed their franchise agreement, or received one first, and right after that, then Charter wanted to come in and renegotiate the terms of their franchise agreement so that the terms were all identical to what CTC was dealing with, so that, yeah, I guess in their words, so that it was kind of an even playing field, so that each of the cable operators would be under the same requirements. Now, the term of this agreement was a 15-year term, so it doesn't, it's not scheduled for renewal until 2020.
Okay.
We can certainly reopen it. We had a little bit of discussion this morning at our department head meeting. It wasn't a lot, but Todd Wicklund from BPU mentioned something about having some updates or has been to some recent training regarding franchise agreements, and thought that that's something that we'd want to consider carefully, whether or not we really want to reopen an existing franchise agreement. So, and I'm not sure exactly what the issues were, pro or con, but I think if there's interest in doing that, we should probably get something from them so they can at least give us, let us know what the pros and cons of doing that might be.
Okay. Then
What
my-
other specific things you want the committee to address? Fees, what else?
Well, it says that there's supposed to be also totals of what we've collected. And where do you obtain that, and who has that number?
Connie would.
Okay, what are our totals? And then the pole removal, like I said, and then they're also supposed to provide maps to the city. And do you get the maps of?
From time to time, we've requested them. I know that the franchise agreement says that on an annual basis, they would give us updated mapping, and that's not happening automatically.
I didn't
So
think so.
I think from time to time, when they do corrections, whether it's them or CTC, we're requesting updated mapping. I think the last time we did that was probably, it might have been a couple of years ago when we were updating a lot of our GIS-based maps. But it's something that we could certainly do is, if there's been changes to the systems to get the updated mapping.
See if I can get a meeting before the first meeting in July. I know it won't be earlier because all I'm doing is history week now. You have to wait till that's over.
Okay, so
But
we'll
I'll get
refer
the
it to the committee,
Okay.
and she's got the items on
Yeah.
there. Thank you so much, Mary, for taking that. And Mary, you're the liaison for it?
Yes,
You round them up?
it's been really easy because they never met.
There was a new person that just joined.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe so. That person might be happy to have a
Do
meeting.
something.
That's right.
Yeah,
I
there's
don't
a
think
lot,
that's
you
what
know,
they're
that stuff.
necessarily-
Take a
It
look
was
at
a
it.
good
it's
committee.
more
It was a very
vacating
good
polls.
committee.
You should have a contact
Dave was
person,
on that.
a contact person for complaints.
Ah, that's true.
That's a
Write that down.
contact person, somebody that you could call. Okay, item number 2, Jeff, 901 11th Avenue Northeast, garage demo.
Okay, yes, this is the garage structure that was located, it's encroaching, over half the garage is encroaching in the alley between 10th and 11th Avenues north of J Street, or excuse me, between I and J Street. That was going to be in the way for the sanitary sewer replacement that was in the contract that we just let. We've worked with the property owner. The property owner has another garage on site. Has had stuff stored in the garage that, quite frankly, were her parents, and has been meaning to get rid of the stuff for a long time. So they're emptying the garage. They're agreeable to have us go ahead and take the garage down and to assess the total cost. We thought that it would probably work best for us to fund the removal of the structure through the construction fund as part of our construction project, and then to assess that cost over a 10-year period of time, similar to what we're doing with the street improvements. So with that, we requested bids for the removal of the garage structure. We received 2 bids, one from Deschantel, one from Hingle. The bid from D. Chantel was the low bid in the amount of $1,011, and staff would recommend that the council accept that low bid. And then to authorize the certification of or rolling that into a special assessment to collect that over 10 years.
Authorize the certification to, I'm trying to make the motion on that. Besides, what was it, you said authorize the certification to what?
To assess
Okay,
the cost over 10 years.
over 10 years. Everybody in favor of that?
I,
When we talked about this a couple months ago anyway, I remember this coming up, that was
Yeah.
going to be a way, so that was brought to us, we told you to go ahead with it. so.
Yep.
Item number, should we just do 4 real quick? Terry Kinder update, I'll go real quick. He had called me on Friday and asked me if he was on the agenda. I said, I don't have the packet, I'll take a look, and then he ended up calling me this weekend, because I called him and left a message. He called me last night. I said, you're not on it, but he said, I kind of want to be on it to talk. I said, well, the best we can do is throw you on either Safety and Public Works, or I can get a hold of the president here and put you under 9B, unfinished business. We decided just to throw him in here, and then he wants to come and talk and plead his case for penalties. In this, I just got to quickly say, Mark, you gave me an email, and I appreciate the email. I just got to get you to spell my name right. I have a C in there, and they're all coming without the C in my name. But you had said that I contacted Jeff this morning. I did not
No,
contact
I
Jeff.
called-
Jeff contacted
Yep.
me. I know I get reprimanded once in a while, but this one I'm not going to take from you.
Thank you for that clarification.
I was gonna call City Hall and tell them that Terry called, and then Jeff called me right out of the chute this morning, and I assumed you guys had a great communication going, but no, I did not contact. So, anyway, you'll have your chance with him when he comes here at 10:08. Item number 5, real quick, alley grading northeast, if we can just jump on that, and then we can just stick to small homes. That's a new one. I just played a tape of some complaints, and we'll see where Jeff goes with that.
Yeah, I'm glad you made us aware of where that's located. I'll have to check to see exactly where we're at with grading alleys. Obviously, they're probably pretty saturated with all the rain that we've had. And earlier this spring, we couldn't get in the alleys right away for a couple of reasons, frost, and then also with all the wet weather that we've had, they were really spongy. So now that they've dried out, we can get them graded up. I'll kind of see exactly where we're at, but if this one's a particular problem, we'll make sure that the grader gets up there.
This is not far from another complaint I had a year ago, and that lady a year ago is sitting in the audience, and I gave it to you.
Okay. Did we
She
get
gave
the alley
me-
graded?
It's terrible.
She gave me a complaint a
Terrible
year
again?
ago about the
Yep.
alley.
Yep.
And nobody knew her then, and I took the complaint to you a year ago, so I just wanted you to bring it up.
And not that I haven't complained yet, but it is terrible.
Did I
There
hear
you
the
go.
word yet?
Pardon?
Did I hear the word yet?
now, and those are all gravel alleys?
Yes, and they're terrible.
Okay, there's a lot of them in
Oh,
town.
yes, there are, yeah. Yeah,
Well,
I think we're, and some of it's staffing too a little bit with our 6 guys. We've got
Right.
3 guys that are on the sewer crew. So, a lot of times we start off, especially when it's a little bit wetter, still have frost on the ground. Instead of sending the graders out on the alley, in our street sweeping process, we usually have 2 operators running street sweepers. We have the 2 street sweepers, and then that requires 2 truck drivers to go around behind the street sweepers to collect debris. So that's pretty much our entire crew until we get through street sweeping. As soon as we get through with that operation, then we can, then we get back over to grading alleys and those types of
But I
activities.
think it's true that with all the rain, they must be much worse.
Yes, I'm sure they
Even
are.
if they were bad
Yep.
before, they must be much worse.
Well, once they break up in a frost and they mix their base with your subsoils, then.
Well, I hope they don't.
Well, I see them breaking through.
Well, once they break through, yeah, when they break through, then they're
Then you run
shot.
the grader over
Yep.
and you're just mixing it like
Yep.
booyah, and then it ain't gonna hold anyway.
Right.
So you're pretty much forced to put some more base on.
Right.
And then repack that base. So because once you break through and mix that up, you've got no base.
Right.
And that's kind of what happened, I think, in front of Dolly's, and also where this lady is, the base,
Yeah, unfortunately, that happens, especially in the spring when the alleys get soft. And Yeah, and especially in areas where we've got the garbage trucks running the alleys. They really tear them up bad, do exactly what you're describing, where they really contaminate the base that we've got in the alley, and yeah, it just creates a lot of problems.
Yeah, and then what you're doing is kind of spreading the sand,
Yeah.
or the, the mixture, but we used to call it contaminated soil, basically, because it's,
Yes.
okay. And I'll let you bring that up to the council, because I'm sure there's a lot of people in the alleys, including Dolly. Item number 3, small house and infill ordinance discussion out. We want to try to get a half an hour of this in. You want to go ahead, Mark?
Sure, I will. Thank you very much. This item is on the council full agenda tonight for a potential second reading, or is on there for consideration of second reading. From the planning department's perspective, I don't, and I'll get into the suggestions that have been made by Councilman Sheeler with a C.
Thank you.
Yep, in a minute, but just a little bit of background. I'm not real clear on the consensus of where the council is at on this issue. I'm presuming that there is a consensus that it is willing to consider dwellings that would be less than 750 square feet, or else we would not have gone through to the second reading. And I'll use that as a premise for continuing the discussion here. From the last meetings, though, and the discussions that were held, one of the concerns that seemed to be apparent amongst some members was the definition of infill. Not really sure that the consensus of the definition was one that was there. The concern that the way infill is defined thus far by definition could include just about any lot in the city of Brainerd. And I guess because of the way our community is developed and the lack of developments in the past bunch of years, it could be argued that most lots in the city could qualify as infill type lots. But that still is a concern for some members in using the definition that we currently have. So there are a couple of other ways that, well, let me back up. I did include several other definitions of infill. If you want to describe infill by a definition, there are a couple of other ways to identify where infill or where small houses and the infill design standards would apply. And you could do that by a geographical area, or you could do it using a date-specific time period. And it was in Alderman Sheeler's email that he suggested that rather than by definition, we consider a time period before which the small house and infill requirements would apply, and after which they wouldn't. In his email, he suggested the date of 1989. Whether or not that's the exact date, if you want to go that way, is the one you choose, but that's a good place to start that discussion of a time period. The other one is by geographical limits, and in the packet was a map of vacant lots in the city, and based on the vacant lot, I outlined 5 different areas where it appeared that infill and the design standards would make the most sense geographically. So to use the infill for small houses and for the design standards, there are the three different ways of doing it. The other thing is, with regard to this, is that there's been so much focus on the issue of the small houses. We've focused so much on, well, gosh, you know, what's it gonna be like for a small house in a residential neighborhood? And I wanna make sure that we are all on the same page, that the design standards that are being proposed are not only for small homes, but would also be for any home that would be classified as infill. If you take a standard size lot that's in the middle of a residential neighborhood, a 7,000 square foot lot that a 2,000 square foot house could be constructed on, the design standards, if approved, would apply to that style of, that size of house as well as a small house. So it goes across the board, okay? The other concern was, should all lots that are vacant and considered infill be permitted to have a small home on it? Then, and as Councilman Sheeler has described in his memorandum, that perhaps, or in his email, perhaps rather than all lots, maybe the small home construction option should be limited to only those lots that are non-conforming in size, or non-conforming in some manner, either in area or in width, and exclude all lots that are conforming in size to the minimum standards of the zoning district. The other thing that, and I emailed the city attorney, and I'm glad to see he's here, depending on how far-ranging the council wants to go tonight in making amendments from the first reading, I want to make sure that we're on the right path in terms of whether or not we need to start the hearing process over again if a change is made and it substantially alters the intent of what is being proposed. Does that change mean that there has to be a new public hearing? And arguably making a change from a small home from 300 square feet up to 400 square feet or 500 square feet arguably wouldn't require a public hearing. But there might be other changes that may, and as we get into that, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page of where we need to be. As I said, that we have the ordinance for second reading consideration. However, we may not be in a position to have that second reading tonight if several amendments still need to be made. If amendments need to be made but don't require a public hearing, we could just make those amendments and bring them back to you at your next meeting that would reflect the consensus of the commission, and then the second reading could occur. But if those changes require a public hearing, then of course the process will take a little longer. So what I'm hoping tonight from the committee and from the council is that consensus, to hear 4 voices, to hear 5 voices, all in agreement on 5, 6 voices, 7 voices, whatever it is, all on the same page with, yes, this is what we want to see in this language. Or perhaps there is no consensus, or the consensus is the other way, that under no circumstances, we've thought about it more, under no circumstances do we want to permit a house that's less than 750 square feet. And then, obviously, we would discontinue, we would not have a second reading, except for unless you want to correct that inconsistency that's there in the one section of the ordinance where we have a minimum house size of 1,000 and a minimum house size of 750 identified. Regardless of what happens, I would like to get that inconsistency corrected as a very, 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 very minimum.
Thanks, Mark.
So,
And I'm gonna ask the attorney, but I don't think any of the changes I asked would require, starting from the beginning, because it's more restrictive. And you say if we go in the direction of more restrictive, it doesn't need the second. So, going from 400 to 500 is more restrictive. And we were always talking about being on non-conforming and substandard lots right from the beginning. That was the infill talk anyway. And that's definitely the definition of infill was, filling in that area. So I don't see this language changing other than, the annexation part of it, or, picking an area.
I know the question's directed to the
Yeah.
attorney, but if I may jump in before he answers, the one concern I had is if the council chooses to use a geographic area,
Yep.
that has to be, from my perspective, introduced into the zoning ordinance as some type of an overlay,
Yeah, okay, got it.
which may trigger the need for a new hearing. I just want to throw that in there.
How about the 1989 annexation?
That's a good question, too. I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean, I tend to agree with you that we don't have to start at the beginning again. The public hearing, the purpose for the public hearing is to, take input from the public and then adapt as needed. So if every time you're going to make a change after a public hearing and then go back to a public hearing, it's kind of a never-ending cycle.
Thank you.
The downside of that is if someone then comes up and applies for something based on what may have been published or what they may have earlier seen to be being proposed, and it's different, and it creates a lot of dissension. So, I don't know. I guess if we're talking about this, I told Gary I saw him somewhere Saturday, and I told him I would definitely support going to the 500. I think that's reasonable. I could have lived with the 400, but I'm perfectly willing to go to that. However, I disagree with Gary on the prior to 1989 only. I think there may be annexed properties where there would be even more appropriate for the small. Many of those are kind of out of the city limits, and it may be totally appropriate to try small houses there if there are non-conforming lots. I agree, though, it should say non-conforming. I agree with that. And I don't think it should be defined geographically for the older parts of Brainerd, because I think that smacks of segregation. And I don't think we want to go that route. It's kind of like saying, well, if I own a really nice 2,500 square foot house in a nice area of town, I don't want any small house by me. But if you live in an older area of town, it's not quite so fancy, it's all right for you to have it. In a way, it's kind of implying that the small house will be dowdy. And I think a small house, and we have design standards, and I like that, I think it can be beautiful. I think they can be wonderful. And I think they're going to bring in some very nice people, Gary, very nice people who otherwise wouldn't buy a house here, maybe wouldn't even rent. I really think you're looking at an opportunity. I kind of equate it, although it's a different subject, but I equate it to the food truck thing. And all the misery that went on probably will continue to go on. But I think it's a trend that's coming. And if we can get ahead of it and then make it work, so it's nice.
I have one question for you,
Make it
real quick.
nice, Gary.
Item number 3 is your hiccup, and we only got 10 minutes to work with. My hiccup on that is, I'm just gonna tell you, after the annexation of this, most of the lots are not, non-conforming or substandard. Because in order to plat them for everything else, they're all the right size lots. So if we're gonna do this infill thing, you're putting these houses now out in the middle of nowhere, and if you put a house in development, a small house, nothing big's gonna grow in there.
That's
But
right.
what I wanna also tell you is, everybody out there right now is gonna put covenants on. And what they're gonna do, so,
They should.
they're gonna put covenants that they're gonna say, you can't put a house, small house out there. And so you are gonna have, and you were talking about transparency, you will never know which developers are putting. So really, you will never see it in newly annexed property, small houses, because nobody's gonna allow it without, and they're gonna put covenants as anyway to stop it.
What I agree with you is that, there probably aren't any non-conforming lots. So it's probably redundant to say it. But if there were, then I think that same opportunity should be there. And as for covenants, sometimes people will buy a place if there's covenants, and sometimes they won't. So the covenants usually are, the buyer reflects what the covenants are. The buyer doesn't like the covenants, not gonna buy them.
Yep.
It's that simple.
Yep.
But I think, Gary, I really think we can do this.
Mhm.
And I agree completely that this is something that should be revisited, not just annually, but maybe on a regular
Yeah,
basis.
I'm gonna grab Chip here. So you're okay with 1, 2, and 4?
I am, when I read this, I'm going, wow, that all makes sense to me. The one area I got a little hung up is when you talk about the older parts of Brainerd, who's going to determine what's older or not? And how do you, what does older mean?
Yeah.
That gets a little bit fuzzy for me, but otherwise, everything else I'm totally behind.
Can we say 1, 2, and 4 then we agree with?
Yes. And I'm fine with 3 also, except for just that older parts.
Okay, and I agree. And what I meant was that was prior to 1989, or, the old days when they were bringing the city and incorporating it, they're trying to make it retrofit and work. Now, newer parts of town, that's the platting and the planning process, they're gonna make it work. And we don't wanna send a concept that this is an infill. This definition of this is infill.
Right.
And it isn't for newly annexed areas and stuff, it's for infill. And that's where the definition of infill comes in.
And I think if we revisit it, I think it won't be too many years, we'll find a request. I think it's gonna be a problem. And I like that the design. It's not just gonna be a fish house project. And we're having the exact opposite argument as Edina, where people are squawking and carrying on because they're building the McMansions next to some of your very nice but smaller homes. And I think really
okay
this
with-
is preferable to what that would be. That's my
With all
opinion.
4? 4 or 1?
You've been following that argument, haven't you?
Yeah.
I know you should
And
jump in right
I
now, I
think this
suppose.
is much preferable.
Oh, yeah.
With that, knowing that, Eric, are we okay then to continue with the second reading with, the consensus was, and we can get down to, the 3 with Mary and stuff, but, we're taking 4 items here and implementing them, and are you okay with that, Mark? Just, get this thing off dead center?
What, if I could, where are you at then with number 3 then?
I'm okay with it. Mary's not, and I just think we can bring that consensus
Let's
to the
bring
council.
that to the council
Yeah,
and see
that's
what
one,
they think.
you
You know,
you
we
have
can
4
go-
head nods
right.
already on one.
Right, we can let
1,
them see
2, and
what they
4.
think and go from there.
From the planning department's perspective, if there's gonna be several changes, I would feel more comfortable if we were allowed to redraft that ordinance and bring it back at the next meeting.
Okay.
For a start over, or
No.
just as a reconsideration? for
As the second reading,
Okay,
Right,
yeah.
sure.
I think that's fine.
Okay, so that'll be the motion here,
Right.
is to send it back to the
Right.
planning commission.
Right.
Yep.
When will we have the
Probably
next
have
planning
to-
commission?
Probably be sleeping on
We wouldn't need the planning commission. We wouldn't need to start over. We would have no hearing. It would
Oh,
just be bringing it back, the revisions back for second reading.
So, tonight, the motion will be to refer it back to the
Right.
next council
For those
meeting.
changes,
For
the
changes.
identified changes.
Why don't we do that?
I think so.
Well, my gosh, look at this, Jeff. We are caught up.
The only question I would have is if the council president wants any type of introduction on this, or how you
Yep.
want to
Probably.
introduce it to the council.
Yep. I think you can bring it up, we're gonna bring it up on your committee and let you explain what you're, and then we can get the feel from the rest. The head nods and non-head nods.
Okay.
There we go.
Wow.
Well, how about that?
Good job.
Yeah.
And thanks for putting this together too. This really helped
Yeah.
clarify things for
It
me.
was a good job.
Otherwise, it
It
was
was very
just
good.
page after page.
Yeah, it
After a
was
while,
really
my
good.
brain went numb, and you kind of pulled it all together.
Well, thank you so much for that. Appreciate that.
Now, I want to know where are
we
we?